13 years in prison for a wrongful rape conviction. The then second-year law student Ndlovu has always maintained his innocence. The Pietermaritzburg High Court overturned his rape conviction and sentence last week. It ruled the magistrate had brazenly intervened and made leading statements to assist the state's case to discount evidence such as DNA analysis. Ndlovu spent his first weekend out of bars after more than a decade.
Sinye kuphela ihlelo nginalo ukuthi nginikwe ithuba lokuthi ngisebenze la engakwazi ukuthi ngisebenze khona. Nginikwa nje ithuba ukuthi ngisebenzise lezi ziqe nginazo engikwazile ukuthi ngiyithole ngisangaphakathi ejele. Ilokho engicabanga ukuthi kuwukhiye okwi direction yami ukuthi izohamba kanjani ukuthi manginganikwa nje ithuba. So ukuba brief nje ukufuna umsebenzi. Ukufuna umsebenzi ngithola umsebenzi ngikwazi ukujabulisa abazali bami besakhona besaphila.
So how do wrongfully convicted pick up the pieces once they're released from prison? It's definitely not easy. They often return home only to find that no one believes in their innocence. It's even harder to get a job. Added to that, loved ones are cautious or reserved around them. So what can we do to help victims of injustice get their lives back? How do we help them improve their image and with the odds stacked against them? To answer these questions, I have with me Ruth Hopkins from the Wits Justice Project, Leslie Ann van Selm from Kulisa Social Solutions, and Rudzani Mafumela from Legal Aid. Thanks, ladies, so much for your time. Appreciate it. Ruth, let's start with you. Can you just tell us how often we actually see this happen, where a person is wrongfully convicted and then ultimately, after years, finally their innocence is proved, which shouldn't be the case?
Yeah, so that's a really difficult question to answer because the Department of Justice doesn't keep any records of acquittals or wrongful convictions. We at the Wits Justice Project have an anecdotal idea. So in the years 2016 and 17, 157 people contacted us claiming they were wrongfully convicted. We can only investigate like 10% of that maybe. So that's actually one of the main things that need to happen. There needs to be a clear idea of how widespread the problem is.
Yeah. And when do people actually give up? When do they stop trying to get the help from you as an organization, though? They just don't hear back from you? How does that work?
No. We correspond with them. And if we can't help them, we'll let them know.
So, Leslie, let's talk about the difficulties of people actually being released after being convicted of a crime falsely and wrongfully. We heard the story of Njabulo and what's happened with him. We see him back with his family. We hear that it is going to be a difficult time to be reintegrated into his community, to his family as well. How does that work for people when they are released?
I don't think it actually does work for people. I think once you've been incarcerated, even if you are acquitted, you are always labeled as an offender. And there's so much unlearning to do with the community, with the family. And that takes a lot of intervention. It takes a lot of mediation, restorative justice, dialogue circles, contacting different family members, and most importantly, trying to retrace the crime to find out what the causal factors were of this person being incorrectly judged. So it's a very, very complex case, and I don't think there's enough support out there, and I don't think many offenders who are released and acquitted ever have the chance to really restore their image and their relationships in the community.
So let's talk then about how a magistrate, Rudzani, can get something like this so horribly wrong, especially when the evidence does not support the decision being made.
It's unfortunate that our criminal justice system, we only work on evidence which is presented before us and how the evidence is presented. I might believe that you are innocent, but you find that the evidence is overwhelming against you. If not, the way you present your case. You might have a good case on your side, but when you take a stand to actually testify or your witnesses, you are a bad witness. Or you lie about something small. The magistrate might say that, which means this person might be lying about each and everything. That's unfortunate. Unfortunately, that's how we deal with the cases in court. Yes.
What sort of recourse does somebody have if this happens to them?
If you strongly believe that you are being wrongfully prosecuted. You believe that the state was not even supposed to prosecute you or to proceed with the case, because the fact that the case has been opened, it doesn't mean that the state must proceed with prosecuting you, even if they can see that the case against you is weak. How do they see that? They see this from the statements which the victim or the complainant or the witnesses makes before the case goes to court. If they see that the case is weak against you, they're not supposed to prosecute. They must refuse prosecution and withdraw a case against you. So if you believe that from the word go, from the statements, the case against you was weak, you were not even supposed to be prosecuted, what you can do, you can sue the state for malicious prosecution, but only if you believe that they were malicious in prosecuting you. Or if you can prove, or if you have evidence that the victim or the complainant lied about these charges, then you can sue that person directly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ruth, of course, it's a very tricky issue, especially when it comes to matters of rape. And, you know, there's more and more talk about actually getting, you know, rapists behind bars. And when it comes to something like that, which is the allegation we saw with the previous story, I mean, it's hard to prove. This is what the High Court found. It found that the magistrate actually interfered to help the state's case by reaching certain conclusions. And that in itself is questionable.
It was bizarre, yeah. Absolutely. And it's obviously a very delicate matter because you don't want victims of rape, you know, for them not to be believed. But I mean, we've got a DNA law in South Africa, you know, so that often offers pretty conclusive evidence. While you see that men are accused of rape without DNA evidence based on, like, I think also the Ndlovu case, on eyewitness statements, and those can be very shaky, or they can be complete lies.
Yeah, and the DNA analysis was what came into question there. It actually did not show, apparently, that he was linked to this crime, and that's why it was questioned. So Leslie, let's get back to you about the integration. Given that the justice system failed this person because the High Court has decided that it was a wrongful conviction, do they have a responsibility to ensure that the reintegration happens smoothly?
I've never seen evidence of that. What I do know from the experience of working with offenders and offender reintegration and restorative justice over the past 21 years is that offenders who are acquitted literally are often identityless. Their families, they've lost contact with their families, they've lost status, their family has stigmatized them to a very large degree. They re-enter the community being grossly misjudged. But then there's also the other issue of the victims in the first place. The victims now hear that this offender is no longer the offender, and they are now petrified that this person's coming back. Where is the real offender? So they are being re-victimized or almost positioned as being the offenders themselves. So there's a very, very complex problem to deal with here. And there's so little support offered in this case. And also, our experience has shown that to mediate a case like this, where you get parties together and talk and come to the causal factors and try to get some peace, can take between 60 and 70 hours. And who pays for that? You need experienced social workers, you need a proper system. So somewhere along the line, there's not justice. There's not justice for the victims in the first place, there's not justice for the offenders who are now the victims, and there's no justice to actually enable people to really move forward. So the interventions that are offered, and these interventions have to be very, very carefully tailor-made to actually enable the offender, former offender or the non-offender, to be able to move forward without very, very aggressive behavior and with proper therapy.
All right, let's speak to Maki from Bloemfontein, who's on the line. Maki, what's your question?
Yes, sir. How are you?
Good, thanks. What do you have to ask our panel?
I just want to say that if the offenders get out of prison or out of incarceration, they're obviously going to land back in the situation that they were in. So it's better if the government alleviates them from the situation that they're in, and from there on it makes the situation better. Henceforth, the situation that they're in is going to be better, and they're going to start doing things a little bit better. I mean, if you get out of prison be better. They're going to have better opportunities and how they deal with life. You know, yes, that's what I have to say for now.
So ultimately, he's saying that when a person is convicted, even if it's wrongfully so, there's a big hype about it. Even in the media, we say that somebody is convicted of a crime, and he's basically saying that when they are released and found that they were wrongfully convicted, the same thing should apply, so that people are now aware that this person was wrongfully convicted. Is that even possible, though?
Really not, because again, you know, the awareness around wrongful convictions is not there. And we've worked on a case of a man called Daniel Brilliance, who was also acquitted of rape after spending 5 years in prison. My colleague Caroline Raffaeli worked on that case. And when he came out, he was considered a rapist, and it's completely ruined his life.
Yeah. Rizani, let's talk about the recourse that these people actually do have in terms of what they can sue the state for. Given that it's going to be very difficult for them to find a job because of this tainted name that they now have, they can argue that and claim millions from the state. Do we actually see that happen?
They can, it's their right to do that. But the problem they're going to have is that they have to prove to the judge that the state maliciously prosecuted them. So that is the problem. Because like the state has got a problem, because if a case is reported, a victim comes and says that I've been raped, and then you write the statement, and especially in rape cases, because there are no witnesses, you find that it's only the victim and the offender. Person comes and says that I've been raped, the state needs to prosecute that person. The state cannot just refuse to prosecute. There must be something so clear that this offense did not happen, which is very, very difficult, especially because there's no evidence. There's no witnesses, other witnesses.
So in the case of Njabulo Ndlovu, I mean, obviously the higher court found that the magistrate erred in coming to this decision. So he has grounds to stand on, because a higher court found that the magistrate made a wrong decision. There was nothing malicious about it, but it was a mistake. And he was in jail for 13 years.
13 years is a long time. I think he can sue.
Yeah.
He can sue Department of Justice and quoting that magistrate also. If it's so clear that he erred or he interfered or he supported the state case where he was not supposed to do that. Because as a magistrate or as a judge, what you're supposed to do, you're supposed to be a referee. You're supposed to be there and listen to both sides, not help the state, not help the defense.
All right, let's speak to Fanele from Pretoria. What's your question?
I just want to know, is there some sort of compensation for this guy who went to jail for 15 years? This guy would have spent his time with his family, he would have made millions, he would have made thousands, but now he comes back, he doesn't have anything. Does the state provide some sort of compensation for this guy to pick up where he left when he went to prison?
All right, thanks for that. Leslie, you want to pick up on that?
I haven't been exposed to that, and I've dealt with many cases and supported many people over the years who are in this position. I think really it's up to the NGO sector and different support groups to help these people move forward.
But the state doesn't feel obliged to actually compensate somebody when they are wrongfully convicted, right? Because they wait to be sued.
Yeah, that's actually not very fair, I'd say, because in other countries, you'll see that if somebody is wrongfully convicted or is acquitted, the state will pay out a certain amount per day they spent in prison, because they shouldn't have been in prison, and it ruins lives. But I do believe that recently 2 men sued the state for a wrongful rape conviction, and they got 3.6 million rand each. So that's a precedent, you know?
Yeah, so going forward, I mean, when it comes to something like this, what role can government play in actually making sure that it doesn't just sit back and wait for someone to sue them?
Well, I mean, the first thing they need to do is get an idea of how widespread it is. And then I also think the second thing that you see happening is that the criminal justice system is constantly confirming itself. Mistakes are not picked up on. Call it a professional bias, I don't know. Again, in other countries, what you see when there are wrongful convictions, they've set up commissions that exist kind of outside the legal system, but that have the power to refer cases back into the legal system. So it's a system of checks and balances, because the legal system is designed by humans and so is inherently flawed.
Yeah.
And there needs to be a mechanism to address that before you go into like suing and so on. You need to have something within, or actually outside of the system, that deals and that picks up on these mistakes.
Yeah. All right, we have another caller on the line. Miriam from Johannesburg, what do you have to say?
Hi, I want to find out from the panel. My question is, what happens to the victim, which is the lady who claimed that she was raped? In this case, when I think Mr. Ndlovu also has now been exonerated, does that victim have to face any consequences, or is she just let out, or has she, for example, wrongfully identified a person who's not guilty? So what happens to the victim that initially pointed out this man to be the one who probably raped her?
All right, thank you so much for that. Appreciate. Ruzani, you?
Yes. There's two things which can happen to this complainant who lied. If there's evidence that indeed this complainant lied, which means the person can be prosecuted, the state must institute criminal charges called perjury, lying under oath. Firstly, they lied when they made a statement that she was raped. And then secondly, she lied when she testified under oath that she was raped. So she can be prosecuted for perjury, or she can also be sued, or both. Yes.
Leslie, just give me your closing thoughts on the way forward in dealing with these cases, because we now have a couple of people who we know of who are out after being wrongfully convicted. What do we need to do as NGOs, as society, as government, to make sure that they are given a fair chance at trying to restart and pick up the pieces?
Well, the damage done to anybody behind bars is irreparable, I believe, to a degree. So what we need to do is we need to try to have discourses around restoration, but most importantly, we need to look at how we can develop and capacitate the exoneree as such to move forward in life, and that a lot of support is needed, a lot of therapy, and most importantly, that they can tell their stories and tell their stories in a way that they're comfortable, and in time telling your stories and being able to release what you've been through, because it's very, very traumatic, and there's a lot of complexities that we deal with from an emotional point of view. So we've got to look at how we can restore people, restore families, and restore dialogue, and get to the truth behind it all, and share the truth so that people can regain their status.
All right, thank you very much for your time, ladies. I do appreciate it. That was Ruth Hopkins from the Wits Justice Project, Leslie Ann van Zyl from Kulisa Social Solutions, and Ruzani Mafumela from Legal Aid.